Attention! You're about to discover a true story, a story that remained hidden for decades, an account based on rare documents, forgotten testimonies, and archives that almost disappeared. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you appreciate historical stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Now, turn up the volume, turn off notifications, and come with me on this investigation. Pause. The folder appeared in 1977, misfiled among thousands of documents from the Second World War. Just another brown paper envelope, thin and unremarkable. When Dr. Eleanor Thompson found it in the National Archives, she almost set it aside. Almost. What caught her attention was a single notation in the corner. 2 words, written in faded blue ink. Ebony Eagles. Inside were 27 pages of flight records, mission reports, and a single photograph. The records detailed missions flown by the 332nd Fighter Group, an all-black unit trained at Tuskegee, Alabama. But what made Dr. Thompson stop and read every word were the numbers. Kill ratios unprecedented in the European theater, success rates that defied explanation, and a list of commendations that were apparently never awarded. For 6 weeks, Dr. Thompson traced paperwork through 3 government agencies. She interviewed 7 surviving pilots. She compared official histories with the documents in that thin folder. What she uncovered was more than a forgotten chapter of history. It was a deliberate erasure. The story of how America's black aviators outflew Hitler's best pilots had been systematically removed from the official record, until now. The year was 1942. America had been at war for exactly 3 months and 17 days. In the small office at the War Department, Colonel William Hayes stared at the memorandum on his desk. The order seemed impossible. Absurd, even. Train colored men to fly combat aircraft, form an all-Negro fighter squadron. Hayes had been an Army Air Corps man since 1928. 14 years in service had taught him many things. The most important, military aviation was a white man's domain. It wasn't prejudice, he told himself. It was simple fact. Colored men lacked the reflexes, the mathematical aptitude, the cool judgment needed to pilot a modern fighter plane. He picked up his pen to draft a response. A polite but firm rejection of the entire concept. Then he noticed the signature at the bottom of the order. It wasn't some eager congressman or civilian committee. The paper had been signed by the president himself. Colonel Hayes set down his pen. 3 days later, he arrived at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. The base had been constructed in haste, its facilities far below the standards of other training centers. Hayes expected to find chaos. Instead, he found Captain James Washington waiting on the tarmac, standing at perfect attention. Washington was 32 years old, tall and lean, with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. His uniform was impeccable, despite the Alabama heat. He had graduated from Howard University with a degree in engineering, then spent 6 years flying mail for a small private company. Hayes didn't offer his hand. "Captain Washington," he said, looking past the man to the airfield beyond. "I've been assigned to oversee this experiment." "We're aware of your assignment, sir," Washington replied, his voice carefully neutral, "and we're ready to begin immediately." "Are you?" It wasn't a question. Hayes finally looked at the man directly. "You understand what you're up against? The Luftwaffe pilots have been flying combat missions for years now. They've shot down the best pilots England and France could put in the air." "Yes, sir. We've studied their tactics extensively." "Studying and doing are different things, Captain." "Indeed they are, sir." A pause, just long enough to be noticed. "That's why we're eager to begin. Today, if possible." Hayes felt something he hadn't expected, a flicker of respect. The training began at dawn the next day. 27 men, each one selected from hundreds of applicants, college graduates, engineers, mechanics, men who had learned to fly in civilian life despite every obstacle society had placed in their way. Lieutenant Marcus Green was the youngest at 23. He'd grown up in Harlem, the son of a postal worker who spent every spare dollar on his son's education. Green had taught himself mathematics from library books, then won a scholarship to study physics at City College of New York. His instructors noted his exceptional reflexes and spatial awareness. His fellow cadets noted his temper. "You're too hot," Washington told him after Green nearly crashed during a training exercise. "A fighter pilot needs fire in his belly but ice in his veins." "Yes, sir," Green replied, eyes fixed on the horizon. "But with respect, they're saying we can't do this. All of them. Every white officer on this base is waiting for us to wash out." "Then we don't wash out," Washington said simply. "We don't give them the satisfaction." Green looked at his commanding officer. "That's it? That's your advice?" "Don't wash out? That's an order, Lieutenant." Washington's voice was quiet but firm. "Whatever else happens, we do not fail." The training intensified, dawn to dusk in the air, then hours of classroom instruction after dark. While other units received new equipment, the men of what would become the 332nd Fighter Group trained in obsolete P-40 aircraft, their engines prone to overheating and failure. Colonel Hayes watched it all. Twice he drafted messages recommending the program be terminated. Twice he set the papers aside, unsigned. On the 17th of June, 1942, Captain Washington found Hayes in his office, reviewing flight logs. "Sir, the men are ready for the next phase," Washington said. Hayes didn't look up from the papers. "They've completed 400 hours of flight time. Standard protocol is 500 before advanced combat training. With respect, sir, we don't have that luxury. Every day we spend here is a day we're not in the fight." Now Hayes did look up. "You're that eager to die, Captain?" "No, sir. I'm that eager to serve. Same as any other American." Hayes studied the man before him. He had been watching these pilots for months now, had seen their discipline, their determination, had begun against his will to admire them. "We received new orders this morning," Hayes said finally. "Your unit ships out next week. You'll complete your training in North Africa, then join the fight in the European theater." Washington's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Thank you for informing me, sir. I'll tell the men. There's something else you should know." Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the airfield where a dozen pilots were running pre-flight checks on their aircraft. "The Germans have never seen Negro pilots before. They don't think you exist. They certainly don't think you can fight. Is that supposed to be an advantage, sir?" "Take any advantage you can get, Captain. War doesn't give out many." The 332nd arrived in North Africa in July of 1942. The heat was familiar. The rest was alien. Desert stretching to the horizon. The constant sound of distant artillery. And, most jarring of all, the curious, sometimes hostile stares of white soldiers who had never seen black officers before. "Keep your heads high and your mouths shut," Washington told his men as they settled into their new base. "We're here to fly and fight, not to change anyone's mind about us." But Lieutenant Marcus Green had another perspective, shared quietly among the pilots of his squadron. "Every mission is a message," he said, checking the ammunition belts on his P-40. "Every Nazi we shoot down tells these white boys we belong in the air. Every bomber we protect tells them we belong in this uniform." Their first combat mission came 3 weeks after arrival. Escort duty for a squadron of B-17 bombers targeting German supply lines near Sicily. Simple, straightforward, minimal risk of enemy contact. Washington led the formation himself, with Green as his wingman. 8 fighters in total, climbing to 20,000 feet over the Mediterranean. The bomber crews looked up in surprise as the fighters took position above and around them. Even through the roar of engines, some of the pilots could hear the radio chatter. "Are those the colored boys from Tuskegee? Heard they were sending them. Didn't think they'd actually do it. Just keep them away from my bomber. Don't need any amateurs out here." Washington's voice cut through the chatter. "All aircraft maintain radio discipline. 332nd will provide high cover. We have your backs, gentlemen. The mission proceeded according to plan until they were 17 minutes from the target. That's when Green spotted them first. 12 black dots approaching from the northeast. Messerschmitt 109s, Germany's premier fighter aircraft, climbing to intercept. "Bandits! 2 o'clock high!" Green called. "Count is 12 plus." Washington's voice was calm. "Acknowledged. All fighters, form up. Bombers continue to target." The Nazi fighters closed rapidly, clearly expecting the American escorts to break and run at the sight of superior numbers. It was a standard tactic. Force the escorts to chase individual attackers, break their formation, then pick them off one by one while the bombers flew on unprotected. But the pilots of the 332nd had studied these tactics for months. They knew what was coming. "Hold formation!" Washington ordered. "Wait until they commit." The Messerschmitts dove, targeting the lead bomber. At the last possible moment, Washington gave the order. "Break now! Green, Herman, Taylor with me!" "We take the lead 4. Johnson, you have the second group." What followed was 4 minutes and 26 seconds of chaos. The sky filled with tracer rounds and the thunder of machine guns. Aircraft twisted and rolled, each pilot seeking the advantage of altitude and position. Lieutenant Green found himself on the tail of a Messerschmitt, its pilot desperately trying to shake him. Green had never fired on another aircraft before, had never tried to kill another man. But in that moment, all he saw was a target. He pressed the firing button on his control stick. His guns roared. 50 caliber rounds tore into the German fighter's fuselage. Black smoke poured from its engine. The aircraft rolled once, twice, then plummeted toward the sea below. Green had no time to process what he'd done. 2 more Messerschmitts were diving on a bomber to his left. He banked hard, pushing his aircraft to its limits, and gave chase. When it was over, the 332nd had shot down 7 German fighters while losing only 1 of their own. The bombers reached their target and returned safely. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary success for a first combat mission. Colonel Hayes met them on the runway when they returned. For the first time since Washington had known him, the man was smiling. "Well done, Captain," Hayes said, offering his hand. "Damn well done." Washington shook it, his exhaustion evident. "We lost Peterson. Engine took a hit. Couldn't make it back to friendly territory." "I know. I'm sorry." Hayes's voice was genuinely sympathetic. "But what you achieved today, the bomber crews are already talking about it." "Sir? They're calling you the Red Tail Angels because of the red paint on your aircraft tails. They're saying they've never seen such precision, such discipline under fire." Washington nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Peterson had been 25 years old, from Detroit, had a fiancée waiting for him back home. Now he was gone, somewhere in the vast Mediterranean. "Get your men some rest," Hayes said, more gently than Washington had ever heard him speak. "There will be more missions tomorrow." There were, and the day after that. Through the fall of 1942 and into the winter, the 332nd flew mission after mission. Their reputation grew with each successful return. Bomber crews began to request them specifically as escorts. The Germans noticed too. Luftwaffe pilots began to report encountering black American airmen. Initial reports were dismissed as hallucinations or misidentifications. But as the evidence mounted, the German High Command was forced to acknowledge this new development. A classified Luftwaffe intelligence assessment, dated December 12, 1942, noted, "American Negro pilots have been confirmed operating in the Mediterranean theater. Initial assessment suggests these pilots are notably disciplined and aggressive. Further observation is warranted." By February 1943, that assessment had changed dramatically. A second document, recovered after the war, stated, "Formations identified by red tail markings should be avoided when possible. These pilots maintain tighter formations than other American units and have demonstrated superior tactical coordination." But within the American forces, a different narrative was emerging. official combat reports began to minimize the role and success of the 332nd. Kills were attributed to other units. Successful missions went unrecognized in daily briefings. Colonel Hayes noticed the discrepancies. During a staff meeting at 15th Air Force headquarters, he directly challenged a senior officer's account of a recent engagement. "The report credits the 82nd with protecting those bombers," Hayes said, "but it was the 332nd that flew that mission. I have the flight logs right here." The room fell silent. The commanding general studied Hayes for a long moment. "Records can be confused in the fog of war, Colonel," he said finally. "What matters is that our bombers are getting through. Let's focus on the bigger picture." Later, in private, an old friend from West Point pulled Hayes aside. "Be careful, William," the man said quietly. "There are people who don't want your colored boys getting too much credit. Makes it harder to justify keeping them segregated after the war." "This isn't about politics," Hayes replied. "It's about recognizing good soldiers doing exceptional work. Everything is politics in this man's army. You know that." Hayes did know, but he also knew what he was witnessing day after day. The men of the 332nd were rewriting what was possible, not just for black Americans, but for the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. On March 23, 1943, Lieutenant Marcus Green led a flight of 4 P-40 aircraft on a routine patrol over Sicily. Weather conditions were poor, with low clouds and intermittent rain. Most air operations had been scaled back. Green and his pilots were 20 minutes into their patrol when they encountered a formation of 6 German bombers, Junkers 88s, escorted by 4 Messerschmitt 109s. The bombers were flying low, using the weather as cover for a surprise attack on Allied positions. "Red 2 through 4, form up," Green ordered, using their call signs. "We're going in." "Sir, we're outnumbered," his wingman, Lieutenant Davis, pointed out. "Protocol is to call for backup." "No time. Those bombers reach their target. A lot of our boys die. Stay tight. Follow my lead." Green led his outnumbered flight directly into the German formation. What followed was described later by a ground observer as the most aggressive air action I have witnessed in 2 years of this war. Green targeted the lead bomber, ignoring the Messerschmitts that moved to intercept him. His first burst of fire damaged the bomber's right engine. His second tore through its cockpit. The massive aircraft shuddered, then began a slow, deadly spiral toward the earth below. The other pilots of the 332nd followed Green's example, pressing their attack despite the odds. When it was over, they had destroyed 3 bombers and 2 fighters, while the remaining German aircraft fled back toward their own lines. Green landed with his fuel gauge, reading empty, and over 300 bullet holes in his aircraft. As ground crews swarmed around the damaged fighters, Colonel Hayes approached Green. "You disobeyed direct orders about engaging superior forces," Hayes said, his voice tight. "You risked your entire flight." Green stood at attention, his flight jacket still damp from the rain. "Yes, sir. I accept full responsibility." Hayes stared at the young lieutenant for a long moment. Then, to Green's surprise, he smiled slightly. "The commander of the ground forces you saved is a 3-star general. He's already called twice to ask who the hell you are." "Sir, there's going to be a commendation for this, possibly a Silver Star." Green blinked in surprise. "Thank you, sir, but I was just doing my job." "You're damn right you were. That's the point I've been trying to make to High Command for months now." The commendation never came. The report of the action was filed, acknowledged, then quietly buried in administrative processing. When Green inquired about it 6 weeks later, he was told the matter was still under review. Pause. "Are you following along so far? If this story is touching you, help us bring it to more people. A like makes a difference. A comment motivates us. A share multiplies our reach, and if you're not subscribed yet, join our community." Pause. Now we return to the moment when everything really started to change. Pause. By mid-1943, the 332nd had been re-equipped with the new P-51 Mustang, the most advanced fighter in the American arsenal. The unit had also expanded, absorbing additional pilots and support personnel from the Tuskegee program. Captain Washington had been promoted to major. Lieutenant Greene was now a captain himself, commanding his own squadron. Their red-tailed aircraft had become a familiar and welcome sight to bomber crews flying the increasingly dangerous missions over Nazi Germany. On July 7, 1943, the unit received orders for what would become their most famous mission. A group of 38 B-17 bombers would attack aircraft manufacturing facilities deep in German territory, beyond the range of most fighter escorts. The 332nd would accompany them the entire way, a task requiring precise fuel management and exceptional navigation. The night before the mission, Washington gathered his squadron commanders. "This is what we've been working toward," he told them, standing before a large map of Europe. "The longest escort mission attempted in this theater. Command specifically requested us." "Because they know we'll get it done," Greene said, studying the route marked on the map. "Or because they know it's a suicide mission," Captain Johnson added quietly. Washington didn't dismiss the concern. "The risk is significant. We'll be facing the best remaining Luftwaffe pilots, defending their home territory. But this target is critical. Those factories are producing the new Focke-Wulf 190 fighter. If they reach full production, our bomber losses will double." The men nodded, absorbing the gravity of the mission. "Get some rest," Washington said. "Briefing at 0400, wheels up at 0630. Dawn brought clear skies and moderate winds, perfect flying weather. As the bombers lumbered down the runway, heavy with fuel and ordnance, the fighters of the 332nd took position above and around them. For the first 2 hours, they encountered no resistance. The formation crossed from Allied-controlled Italy into German airspace without incident. Radio discipline was absolute, no unnecessary communication. Greene flew at Washington's right wing, scanning the sky constantly for the first sign of enemy aircraft. When they appeared, it was not what anyone expected. "Bogies 11 o'clock high," Greene called. "Count is 16. No 20+. Through his canopy, Washington could see them clearly now. More than 20 of the new Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, the very aircraft the bombers were being sent to destroy. And leading them, distinguished by special markings on their fuselages, were aircraft of Jagdgeschwader 54, the elite Grunherz fighter wing, some of the most experienced and decorated pilots in the Luftwaffe. What followed was, by all accounts, the most intense air battle fought by American forces up to that point in the European theater. The German fighters, recognizing the red-tailed P-51s, concentrated their attack on the escorts rather than the bombers. Their intention was clear: eliminate the 332nd, then destroy the unprotected bombers at leisure. Washington's voice remained calm over the radio. "All squadrons, defensive positions. Keep them off the bombers at all costs." For 47 minutes, the air above Germany became a swirling melee of aircraft. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 2-1, facing pilots with years of combat experience. By all conventional wisdom, they should have been overwhelmed. Captain Greene found himself engaged with an aircraft bearing the markings of a German ace. The Focke-Wulf pilot was exceptional, turning inside Greene's attempts to target him, then reversing to gain firing position himself. For nearly 4 minutes, the two aircraft dueled, neither able to gain decisive advantage. Then Greene remembered something Washington had taught him years earlier at Tuskegee: when conventional tactics fail, change the paradigm. Instead of continuing the turning battle, Greene did the unexpected. He cut his throttle sharply, causing his Mustang to slow suddenly. The German pilot, anticipating Greene's continued turn, overshot his position. For less than 2 seconds, the Focke-Wulf appeared in Greene's gun sight. He fired a single burst. The German fighter shuddered as rounds struck its engine. Smoke poured from the cowling. The aircraft rolled inverted, then plummeted toward the earth below. Similar scenes played out across the sky as the pilots of the 332nd fought with a coordination and discipline that confounded their opponents. When the German fighters finally withdrew, 11 of their number had been shot down. The 332nd had lost 3 aircraft, with 2 more damaged but still flying. Most importantly, every bomber had reached its target and released its ordnance. The aircraft factories burned below as the formation turned for home. It should have been celebrated as one of the most successful escort missions of the war. Instead, when the after-action reports were filed, the 332nd's role was minimized. Official accounts credited mixed fighter groups with protecting the bombers. The 11 confirmed kills were recorded simply as enemy aircraft destroyed by 15th Air Force fighters. Colonel Hayes, now promoted to Brigadier General, confronted his superior officer directly. "This is beyond oversight," he said, placing the reports on the general's desk. "This is deliberate erasure of what these men accomplished." The general didn't touch the papers. "The public isn't ready for Negro heroes, Hayes. Not in this war. Maybe not ever. The public doesn't write our official military history. We do. And history serves the greater good. Right now, that means maintaining certain social structures." Hayes felt a cold anger he had rarely experienced in his long military career. These men are risking their lives for a country that won't even acknowledge their achievements. How is that serving any good, greater or otherwise? "Your objection is noted, Brigadier. But this matter is closed." Throughout the summer and fall of 1943, the pattern continued. The 332nd flew more missions, achieved more successes, and received less recognition than any comparable unit in the theater. Yet something unexpected was happening among the bomber crews they protected. Unofficial channels began to spread the word. If you saw red tails on your escort, you were coming home. Bomber groups began to specifically request the 332nd for their most dangerous missions. When official channels denied these requests, informal arrangements were made between unit commanders. On September 12, 1943, a message was sent from the commander of a bomber group to Major Washington. It read simply, "The boys would feel a lot better with your red tails above us tomorrow. Coordinates and time as discussed." No official record of this request exists. Washington showed the message to his squadron commanders. "This isn't authorized," he said plainly. "If we divert from our assigned patrol to escort this group, there will be consequences." Green didn't hesitate. "Those boys need us, sir. That's all that matters." The decision was unanimous. The next morning, the 332nd happened to be in position to escort a bomber group targeting oil refineries near Berlin, one of the most heavily defended areas in Germany. When Luftwaffe fighters rose to intercept, they found not vulnerable bombers, but the now feared red-tailed Mustangs waiting for them. A radio transmission, recorded by a ground station and later preserved in a private collection, captured a German squadron leader warning his pilots, "The Schwarze Vogel are here. Extreme caution. Repeat, the Blackbirds are protecting this formation." After the mission, the bomber group commander met Washington in person. 37 aircraft out, 37 back, the colonel said, offering his hand. "That doesn't happen over Berlin. Not ever." Washington shook the offered hand. "Just doing our job, sir." "Well, your job saved about 300 American lives today." The colonel hesitated, then continued more quietly. "Look, I know what's happening with the reports, the recognition. It's not right. The men talk about it. We all know who's really keeping us alive up there. We don't do it for recognition, sir. No, you do it because you're damned fine aviators and patriots. But history should know that." The colonel reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather notebook. "I've been keeping this unofficial record of every mission where you boys saved our bacon. Names, dates, kill counts, the works. When this war is over, the truth is going to come out. I promise you that." Washington accepted the notebook, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." But the war wasn't over. And the most challenging days for the 332nd still lay ahead. By early 1944, the unit had established itself as one of the most effective fighter groups in the European theater. Their reputation had spread even to the German High Command, where intelligence assessments now specifically addressed the red-tailed Negro pilots as a significant threat. A captured document, dated February 3, 1944, contained the following assessment. American colored aviators have demonstrated unexpected technical proficiency and tactical discipline. Pilots are advised to avoid engaging these aircraft when operating independently and to use numerical superiority when engagement is unavoidable. Within the 332nd, the constant combat had taken its toll. Of the original pilots who had trained at Tuskegee, less than half remained. New replacements arrived regularly, but the core of experienced leaders had been whittled down by enemy action, mechanical failures, and the simple exhaustion of continuous operations. Captain Green, now a battle-hardened veteran with 7 confirmed kills, had become Washington's most trusted squadron commander. The hot-headed young lieutenant from Harlem had transformed into a methodical, precise combat leader who rarely spoke unless necessary. On April 17, 1944, the unit received orders for what would become known as the Berlin Mission. 148 B-17 and B-24 bombers would strike targets in the heart of the Nazi capital. The 332nd would provide close escort for the duration of the mission. The night before, Washington found Green sitting alone in the officers' mess, studying maps of the target area. "You should get some sleep," Washington said, taking a seat across from him. Green looked up, his eyes red from fatigue. "Just making sure I know every inch of the route, sir. Berlin will throw everything they have at us." "I know." Washington was silent for a moment. "You've come a long way since Tuskegee." Green managed a tired smile. "Remember when you told me I was too hot? That I needed ice in my veins?" "I remember." "Well, I've got plenty of ice now, sir." Green tapped the map in front of him. "Sometimes I wonder what it's all for, though. We fly, we fight, we die, and back home, nothing changes." Washington considered his response carefully. "Maybe it doesn't change as fast as we'd like, but it changes. Every mission we fly, every bomber we bring home safely, every German ace who goes down before our guns, it all matters, not just for this war, but for what comes after." "You really believe that, sir?" "I have to. Otherwise, what are we fighting for?" The Berlin mission launched before dawn on April 18, 1944. The massive bomber formation, escorted by fighters including the 332nd, crossed the English Channel and proceeded into German airspace. The Luftwaffe response was immediate and overwhelming. More than 100 enemy fighters rose to intercept, including some of Germany's remaining aces, pilots with 20 or more kills to their credit. Major Washington led the 332nd directly into the largest concentration of German fighters. His voice on the radio was as calm as always. "Red Group engaged the fighters at our 12 o'clock. Blue Group maintained close bomber escort. Green Group, high cover." For the next 31 minutes, the sky over Germany became a swirling battlefield of aircraft. The 332nd, outnumbered but undaunted, fought with a precision born of long experience. Their red-tailed Mustangs seemed to be everywhere at once, disrupting German formations before they could organize effective attacks on the bombers. Captain Green led his squadron against a group of Messerschmitt 109 fighters attempting to attack the bomber formation from above. The ensuing dogfight scattered across thousands of feet of altitude, with aircraft twisting and turning in desperate attempts to gain advantage. Green found himself pursuing a Messerschmitt that had broken from the main group. The German pilot was skilled, using clouds for concealment and executing maneuvers that pushed his aircraft to its structural limits. but Green matched him move for move, closing the distance until the enemy fighter filled his gun sight. He pressed the firing button. His 6 50-caliber machine guns roared in unison. Tracer rounds converged on the Messerschmitt's fuselage. The German aircraft shuddered, then erupted in flames. As Green pulled up to avoid the debris, he scanned the sky for his next target. What he saw instead chilled him to the bone. Major Washington's Mustang was under attack by 3 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters. Despite his skill, Washington couldn't shake all 3 pursuers. As Green watched, tracer rounds from one of the German fighters struck Washington's aircraft. Smoke poured from the Mustang's engine. "Red Leader, you're hit," Green called over the radio. "Break right. I'm coming to assist." Washington's voice came back, strained but controlled. "Negative, Red 3. Maintain bomber escort." "That's an order." Green hesitated only a moment. Then he pushed his throttle to full power and dove toward Washington's position. By the time he arrived, one of the Focke-Wulfs had already fallen away, damaged by Washington's return fire. Green targeted a second German fighter, firing a burst that sent it rolling away, trailing smoke. The third German pilot, seeing his advantage disappear, broke off the attack and fled toward the safety of the clouds. Green pulled alongside Washington's damaged aircraft. Through the canopy, he could see that the Major had been wounded, blood visible on his flight jacket. The Mustang's engine was failing, black smoke pouring from the cowling. "Sir, what's your status?" Green asked, trying to keep the concern from his voice. Washington's response was calm, despite his situation. "Engine's going. I've got a hole in my right side. Not too bad. Aircraft won't make it home, though. Can you reach the channel?" "Negative. I'll have to bail out." Washington paused. "Green, you have command of the group. Get our boys home." "Sir." "That's an order, Captain. Now get back to those bombers. They need you more than I do." Green wanted to argue, wanted to stay with his commander and friend, but he knew Washington was right. The mission had to come first. It always had. "Yes, sir. Good luck." Green banked his aircraft sharply and climbed back toward the bomber formation. The last he saw of Washington's Mustang, it was descending steadily, the cockpit still intact, the pilot still in control despite the damage. Green rejoined the main battle, taking Washington's place as leader of the 332nd. For the next 47 minutes, he directed the unit's defense of the bomber formation with the same calm precision he had learned from Washington himself. By the time the bombers reached their target and turned for home, the Luftwaffe had lost 17 aircraft to the guns of the 332nd. The bomber group had lost only 3 aircraft, a remarkably low number for a mission over Berlin itself. But the 332nd had lost its commander. Major James Washington was listed as missing in action, presumed captured or killed over German territory. The official report of the Berlin mission, filed 3 days later, mentioned the escort operation only briefly. Fighter support was provided throughout the mission. Enemy aircraft losses were significant. No mention was made of the 332nd specifically, nor of Washington's sacrifice. When General Hayes saw the report, he exploded in anger, demanding a correction that acknowledged the unit's contribution and its commander's loss. His request was denied. The war, he was told, was larger than any one unit or individual. Captain Green, now acting commander of the 332nd, gathered his pilots the evening after the Berlin mission. "Major Washington would want us to continue the work," he told them, his voice steady despite his exhaustion and grief. "Tomorrow we fly again. We protect those bombers. We do our duty, just as he taught us." One of the younger pilots spoke up. "Sir, is it true what they're saying? That headquarters won't even acknowledge what we did today? That they won't mention the Major in the reports?" Green was silent for a moment, considering his response. "What matters isn't what some report says," he said finally. "What matters is what we do in the air. The bomber boys know who protects them. The Germans know who they fear, and someday everyone else will know too." 3 days later, A telegram arrived at the 332nd's headquarters. It had been forwarded through multiple channels, some unofficial. The message was brief. Major Washington alive. POW at Stalag Luft 3. Conditions stable. The news spread through the unit like wildfire. Their commander had survived. He was a prisoner, but he was alive. The effect on morale was immediate and profound. Green called a brief meeting of his squadron commanders. "We fly for the Major now," he told them. "Every mission perfect, every bomber protected, every Nazi fighter shot down. That's how we honor him until he comes home." Throughout the spring and summer of 1944, the 332nd continued its exceptional service under Green's leadership. By August, they had flown more than 200 combat missions and were credited unofficially with destroying more than 100 enemy aircraft. Their reputation among bomber crews had reached mythic proportions. One bombardier wrote in his personal diary, "Saw red tails join us over Munich today. Entire crew cheered. Jerry fighters turned tail and ran rather than face them. These colored boys are the best damn pilots in the whole U.S. Army, and don't let anyone tell you different." But in official records, their achievements continued to be minimized or attributed to other units. Medals and commendations were recommended, then mysteriously held up in administrative processing. Newspaper reports about air combat in Europe rarely mentioned the unit at all. On September 3, 1944, General Hayes received orders transferring him back to the United States. Before departing, he met with Captain Green one last time. "They're moving me out," Hayes said without preamble. "Apparently I've become too vocal an advocate for your unit." Green nodded, unsurprised. "We appreciate what you've tried to do, sir. It wasn't enough." Hayes looked genuinely regretful. "But I want you to know I'm not done fighting this battle. When I get back to Washington, I'll make sure people hear about what you men have accomplished." "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Hayes reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I've made copies of every report, every mission log, every commendation recommendation. The originals are being edited for the official record, but these are the truth. I'm entrusting them to you." Green accepted the folder, understanding its importance. "I'll make sure they're preserved, sir." "See that you do, Captain. History has a way of getting rewritten by those with agendas. Don't let that happen to your story." The war in Europe ended in May 1945. The 332nd returned to the United States, having flown 255 combat missions. Their unofficial tally included 111 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, and another 150 damaged or destroyed on the ground. Major Washington, liberated from Stalag Luft 3 by advancing Allied forces, resumed command of the unit for its final missions and returned home. The wounds he had sustained when shot down had left him with a slight limp and occasional pain, but his spirit was undiminished. The unit's return should have been triumphant. Instead, they found themselves largely ignored by the military establishment and the press. A small ceremony was held at their final base in Alabama, attended only by the men themselves and a few family members who could afford to make the journey. During the ceremony, Washington addressed his pilots one last time. "Gentlemen, what we have accomplished goes beyond medals or newspaper headlines. We have proven beyond any doubt what we are capable of. No one can take that away from us, no matter how hard they try to erase it from the records." As the unit dispersed, returning to civilian life across America, they carried with them the documents Hayes had preserved, the unofficial logs kept by bomber commanders, and their own memories of what they had achieved in the skies over Europe. For most, the return to civilian life meant a return to the same discrimination and limitations they had faced before the war. Despite their service, despite their proven capabilities, doors remained closed to them in aviation and many other fields. Major Washington returned to Howard University, eventually becoming a professor of engineering. Captain Green, after several unsuccessful attempts to join commercial airlines, opened a small flight school in New York, specifically focused on training other black pilots. The official histories of the air war in Europe, published in the late 1940s and early 50s, mentioned the 332nd only in passing. Their combat record was presented as adequate but unremarkable. No mention was made of their exceptional protection of bomber formations or their feared status among Luftwaffe pilots. In 1952, a small veterans publication printed an article by a former bomber pilot titled "The Red Tails Who Saved Us." It was the first public acknowledgement of what the 332nd had actually accomplished. The article included excerpts from mission logs and personal testimonies from bomber crews. The military establishment dismissed the article as exaggeration born of misremembered wartime experiences. No official correction to the historical record was made. Former General Hayes, now retired, continued his efforts to have the unit's achievements recognized. His requests for review of the historical record were repeatedly denied or lost in bureaucratic processes. In 1957, in failing health, he wrote a final letter to the Secretary of the Air Force. "I write not for myself, but for the men of the 332nd Fighter Group, whose extraordinary service has been deliberately obscured in our official history. These men fought for a country that refused to acknowledge their full humanity, yet they served with a dedication and skill that should be celebrated rather than hidden. Before I die, I wish to see justice done to their memory." The letter received a formal acknowledgement, but no substantive response. Hayes died in 1961. Among his personal effects was a box containing all his documentation about the 332nd. His family, unsure of its significance, donated the materials to the Air Force Historical Research Agency, where they were catalogued and filed away. In the turbulent 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, a few historians began to look more closely at the role of black Americans in World War II. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen, as they were beginning to be called, attracted scholarly interest. One of these historians was Dr. Eleanor Thompson, a young professor at Howard University. Her interest was initially academic, but became personal when she discovered that her faculty mentor, now the elderly Professor James Washington, had been the commander of the 332nd. Professor Washington rarely spoke about the war, Dr. Thompson later wrote, but when he did, it was with a precision and clarity that made me realize I was hearing history that had not been properly recorded. Thompson began a systematic effort to reconstruct the true story of the 332nd. She interviewed surviving pilots, collected personal papers and photographs, and began the painstaking process of comparing official records with the accounts of those who had actually been there. Progress was slow. Many records remained classified. Others had been edited to minimize the unit's role, and some, she suspected, had been deliberately destroyed. Then, in 1977, came the discovery of that misfiled folder in the National Archives. The document contained flight records and mission reports that had somehow escaped the systematic revision of the unit's history. Most significantly, it contained original Luftwaffe intelligence assessments of the 332nd, captured after the war, but never fully translated or incorporated into American historical accounts. These German documents provided independent confirmation of what the pilots had claimed all along. The Schwarze Vogel, or Black Birds, had been specifically identified by German intelligence as an elite fighting unit to be avoided when possible. Nazi pilots had reported that the red-tailed aircraft consistently outfought and outmaneuvered them, even when the Germans had numerical superiority. Armed with this new evidence, Thompson published her first paper on the subject, The Red Tail Angels, America's Unacknowledged Air Aces. The paper circulated primarily in academic circles, but caught the attention of several journalists with an interest in military history. Slowly, the true story began to emerge into public consciousness. A small documentary film was produced in 1979, featuring interviews with surviving pilots, including the now-retired Captain Marcus Green. Though limited in distribution, the film won several awards at independent festivals. In 1983, Thompson's comprehensive book, Red Tail's Black Wings, was published to critical acclaim. The book methodically documented the 330 seconds combat record, using both American and German sources to demonstrate their exceptional performance. More importantly, it exposed the deliberate effort to minimize their achievements in official histories. The book included facsimiles of original reports, alongside the edited versions that appeared in official records, showing how language had been changed to obscure the unit's contributions. The book generated controversy within military historical circles. Some defenders of the official record dismissed Thompson's work as revisionist. Others, including several high-ranking Air Force officers, acknowledged the validity of her research and called for a formal reassessment of the historical record. In 1995, more than 50 years after the end of World War II, the Air Force formally revised its historical account of the 332nd Fighter Group. The new official history acknowledged their exceptional combat record, their unique status among bomber crews they protected, and the respect they had earned from their German opponents. That same year, a ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., to award long-overdue honors to surviving members of the unit. Former Major James Washington, now 85 years old, received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions during the Berlin mission of April 1944. Former Captain Marcus Green received the Silver Star for his leadership after Washington was shot down. During the ceremony, the Air Force Chief of Staff made a formal statement. "Today, we correct a historical injustice by recognizing the extraordinary achievements of the 332nd Fighter Group. These men not only fought America's enemies abroad, but overcame prejudice and discrimination at home to become one of the finest fighting units in our nation's history." Washington, leaning on a cane but still standing tall, accepted his medal with characteristic dignity. Afterwards, speaking to a group of young Air Force cadets, he said simply, "We did our duty. That's all any of us wanted, the chance to serve our country and be judged by our actions rather than the color of our skin." Captain Green, speaking to reporters after the ceremony, was more direct. "It shouldn't have taken 50 years for the truth to be acknowledged, but I'm grateful it finally has been. Not for myself, but for the men who didn't live to see this day." Of the original pilots who had trained at Tuskegee and served with the 332nd, only 23 were still alive to receive their long-delayed recognition. Many, including General Hayes, who had fought so long for their acknowledgement, had died never seeing justice done. Dr. Eleanor Thompson, whose research had been instrumental in bringing the truth to light, observed the ceremony with mixed emotions. "It is gratifying to see these men finally receive the recognition they earned through blood and courage," she wrote later. But it is also a stark reminder of how easily history can be manipulated, how the achievements of those deemed other can be erased from our collective memory. The story of the 332nd is not just about wartime heroism, but about the ongoing struggle for historical truth and justice. Today, the full story of the Red Tail Angels is taught in military academies and included in comprehensive histories of World War II. Museums display their aircraft, uniforms, and personal effects. Documentaries and films have brought their story to millions who might otherwise never have known about their achievements. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy came in 2009, when the first African-American commander of the United States Air Force Combat Command, a 4-star general, addressed a reunion of Tuskegee airmen. "Every time I climb into the cockpit of an F-16, the general told them, I'm standing on your shoulders. You didn't just change military aviation, you changed America. You proved at a pivotal moment in our history that excellence knows no color. And in doing so, you began a transformation that continues to this day. The last surviving pilot of the original 332nd, who had served as a lieutenant under Washington and Greene, listened from his wheelchair. When asked for his response to the general's words, he smiled. "We just wanted to fly," he said simply. Everything else followed from that. Pause. End of the narrative. Pause. This story, like so many others, was almost forgotten. Your support ensures we continue to rescue these accounts. If you enjoyed it, leave your like, comment what you thought. Share with others who also appreciate real history and explore our channel. There are more cases waiting for you. I'll meet you in the next episode.